Are you ready for more independence as a financial advisor? Consider the RIA model. Schwab Advisor Services has helped thousands of advisors make the move. To find your path, start with Schwab at advisorservices.schwab.com/paths today.
You're a startup founder. Finding product market fit is probably your number one priority. But to land bigger customers, you also need security compliance. Obtaining your SOC 2 or ISO 27001 certification can open those big doors, but they take time and energy, pulling you away from building and shipping. That's where Vanta comes in. Vanta is the all-in-one compliance solution helping startups get audit ready and build a strong security foundation, quickly and painlessly. Vanta automates the manual security tasks that slow you down, helping you streamline your audit. The platform connects you with trusted experts to build your program, auditors to get you through audits quickly, and a marketplace for essentials like pen testing. So whether you're closing your first deal or gearing up for growth, Vanta makes compliance easy. Join over 8,000 companies, including Y Combinator and Techstar startups who trust Vanta. For a limited time, get $1,000 off Vanta at vanta.com/simplify. That's VANTA.com/simplify for $1,000 off.
Sports Card Nation, the hobby is the people. Weekly news and interviews, it's your number one source. Sports Card Nation, the hobby is the people. Sports Card Nation.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to episode 323 of Sports Card Nation. Excited to talk to my guest on today's show. He's the director of the latest hobby movie, but I say it's the greatest hobby movie that we have gotten thus far. And the name of the movie is Hobby Hustle. If you're listening to this on show release date, Friday, it is coming out Sunday the 16th in some limited form, and then will be widely released later on. I was privileged to be able to screen the movie, and really well done, and happy to have Mr. Michael Dault, the director of that film, on today and next week. And we're going to talk about some of the stuff we saw in the I saw in the movie, why he did certain things, the process, some of the difficulties. We're going to talk about, obviously, the hobby. One thing I love about the film, it really covers all aspects. He didn't leave too many stones unturned, if any at all, and really covered, as they say, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and really, did his homework, did his due diligence, and he's a collector in the hobby as well. And I think there's something to be said about that. When someone involved in the hobby does something in the hobby, they have their finger on their pulse, right? We've seen people try to come from outside the hobby and do some hobby stuff, and not saying 100%, but generally doesn't work out the way that's planned all the time. So, well done movie. If you get a chance, check it out. It's called Hobby Hustle, but we're going to talk about it today. So we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with Mr. Michael Dault.
Hobby Hotline is the hobby's only live interactive call-in show. Join some of your favorite hobby personalities every Saturday, 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific, to discuss the hottest hobby topics. If you miss us live, catch us after the fact on all major podcast platforms. Follow us on socials at Hobby Hotline.
Hey everybody, I want to take a quick minute to tell you about a product I use every morning. It's a 2.6 little shot, 12 ingredients. It's called Magic Mind. My friend turned me on to it, fellow teacher at school. It's green tea, some of the ingredients, green tea, olive oil, passion fruit, and all natural. So FDA approved. It's got 55 milligrams of caffeine, and I notice when I take it in the morning, my mind's sharper, I'm calm, and I'm ready to go. When you're dealing with high school kids, that's always important. It's full of antioxidants and it has some immunity support. It's a nootropic, and that's not my thing, but I tell you what, this product may have changed my mind. I know I talk a little bit about it each week, but I do love and actually use the product. So the company was generous enough to give you a 45% off discount code, which you can find in the episode notes. So check it out. Magic Mind, one a day works for me. It can work for you as well. Really excited to talk to my next guest on the Sports Card Shop guest line. He's the director of a new hobby movie coming out very soon called Hobby Hustle. It's none other than Director Michael Dault. Welcome.
Hey, thanks, John, for having me.
So I was privileged. You let me kind of screen the film sort of ahead of time. First off, thank you. I'm, like I told you even before we started recording, Mike, I'm not a lip service guy. Like,
Yeah.
And I'm sure you probably wouldn't even want that. You want like honest feedback, right? This movie, well done. Well done. It's not the first hobby movie, but not that there's a ton of them, but I think it's the best one that I've seen at this point. And one of the things I loved, and I know I did tell you this before we went live here, you really. The hobby, I've been in this thing 40 years, and what it was even 5 years ago, but 10, 20 years ago, it's a vastly different hobby, and it's changing literally as we speak. And I think you did the best job of really kind of covering as much ground of it. Like I said, too, the good, the bad, and the ugly. It wasn't like all bad. It wasn't all good.
Yeah.
It was really, you really tackled it realistically. It wasn't, I don't know if the right word, like an if you weren't trying to necessarily sell anything.
Yeah.
You were just giving a real perspective of what's going on in the hobby and things that, the good, and the very good, and some of the stuff you got to be careful of, and the ugly part of the hobby. And that part, whether we like it or not, as you well know, it's real. And I like that you didn't sort of sweep it under the rug and kind of go around it. You sort of tackled some of that stuff, and you did it. It was just well done. I guess I'll start off with this, Michael. Where did this movie come from? Like, when did the light bulb go on and you said, hey, I'm doing this?
Yeah. I mean, it kind of started a long time ago. The actual planning and shooting process started in 2019 at that time. And before that, I was looking for another project to do, like film related or series related, something I could sink my teeth into, because
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/kidsandfamily. Just go to Indeed.com/kidsandfamily right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
2 years before that, my company, we shot a pilot that we were trying to shop around, and it was kind of this post-apocalyptic pilot. It was called Land of the Outlaws, and it was kind of like a Western, post-apocalyptic Western. Needless to say, never got picked up. Nobody batted an eyelash at it. So I kind of sat down and I started writing a lot of books, because I wrote 2 books. I wrote 2 novels, and those novels did pretty good, actually, to make some money off. I made some money off of them, and I thought, I kind of want to dip this back and do some kind of a film production. So I always was a big collector, and I thought, man, I kind of want to do a love letter to the collecting hobby. I just really want to do maybe like a love letter. So I started doing my research. I started putting together, kind of laying out how I wanted it to go. And initially, one of the first stories I came across, I was reading this Sports Illustrated article by Luke Wynn, and it was about Operation Stolen Base with Cliff Panizich, who becomes a central figure in my documentary. And from there, it kind of just took off. And at first, I wanted this love letter, this happy-go-lucky documentary. But then the more I started thinking about it, I thought, well, no, if I'm going to do this right, I have to show all sides of the hobby. And I've gotten burned before, not a lot, but I've gotten burned before with, autographs, if they're real or not. I talked to a guy that's in the state I live in Michigan. I won't say his name because he's embarrassed of what happened, but he had a hockey collection over 200,000 worth. And, I remember him talking to me that he was just crushed to find out when he tried to get it authenticated that most of it was fake. So that really kind of struck home for me. And I said, okay, I want to take this documentary and show the good and the bad of it. And that's kind of where it took off from 2019 on. Yeah.
And like I said, you didn't leave a lot of stones unturned. You really, when watching the film, I was like, it just flowed right to me, and you really covered a lot of ground. Now, it is a little long in length, but for me, but here's what I'll say about that. When you're interested in a movie and it captures your attention, you're not looking at the time. You just realize it after the fact. So there's the compliment in there. Speaking of the length, did you sort of know that was kind of where you were going to be at, or it just that's where you needed to be at to include everything you wanted to include?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I mean, I was always worried I wasn't going to have enough footage. I always thought, because I kind of wanted this to be an 1.5-hour documentary, and I always thought I wasn't going to have enough footage. There's actually a lot of footage we cut out, a lot of footage, and there was other stories involved, and I was like, man, I kind of wanted to pitch this as a series, but when I was pitching it as a series, nobody wanted it as a series. They were looking more like, oh, I think this would be better as just a standalone film. And I wasn't going to screw around with, okay, well, I'm really going to try to pitch it as a series and get funding. And I just couldn't do that. So I knew I had to make this documentary myself off my own money, but I knew it had to be just a movie because a series is really hard to get distribution. So I just went into it thinking, okay, I'm going to make this as short as I possibly can. And then obviously it came out to 2.5 hours worth. But that's with some serious cutting. I mean, we cut some massive stories. So going into it, I kind of wanted just 1.5 hours, but it became a lot more.
Well, with some of the footage that didn't make it into the film, I'll put you on the spot. Might we see a part 2 or another film altogether?
I want to do something with the footage because there's some good footage. We were covering a gentleman who was in Wisconsin. He was a collector, and he amassed this huge collection, a warehouse full of cards. And he ended up passing away while we were filming. We didn't get enough footage of him to really do anything. And so, but we have some footage of him. And then we have some other footage of a few other stories that were really, really good. And after this is done, I don't want to wait. I'm not a big fan of wasting footage. So I kind of want to prepackage it and maybe make it as a part 2 or make it, I just don't know the release aspects of that. I don't know if I would have it released on my website or YouTube, or if somebody would want to pick it up. So honestly, John, it's still just kind of in the air, but I definitely want to do something with the footage that we cut out.
Yeah, I hope you do, because if it's anything like this film, I'm sure I will enjoy that as well. You wanted to. I appreciate it too. I'm a history guy. I'm a teaching assistant by day. And that's sort of my field of expertise is history. But being in the hobby myself for 40 years, which makes me, I am old, but it definitely hits home when I say that. I love, we're here today, right? But we're here today for a reason, because of things that happened prior. Everything kind of connects and is the bridge to where we are now.
Yeah.
And, people who've been in the hobby or and know hobby history know the importance of Jefferson Burdick. And he's very underrated. Like, very few people talk about him, know about him, quite frankly. And obviously, when I screened the film, I had no idea that you were going to cover him or incorporate him in the film, and you did, and you did a great job with it. And so kudos for someone that's really instrumental in what we have now, and cataloging and identifying some of these sets and releases. When they, today they're all branded, but back in the day, as you well know, they really weren't. He kind of cataloged all that, and then had his. He's. I'm in Syracuse now. I'm originally from New York City, and he literally worked at a factory about 5 blocks up on.
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/kidsandfamily. Just go to Indeed.com/kidsandfamily right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
My street up the road. Went to Syracuse University, but was born in Central Square, which is a town a little north of Syracuse, about 20 minutes from here. I'm in that area for different things quite often, and I won't make this about me. I'll make this story as short as I can. I kind of assumed, because he went to New York City with his Met, and actually worked in the back room at the Met doing the cataloging and whatnot. I assumed he had been buried in New York City a few years, when I was thinking about it. And then I did some research and realized, no, he was interred in this cemetery that I'm very familiar with in Central Square, his hometown. And I'm like, holy smokes. I just went to sort of pay my respects, one hobbyist in a sense to another.
Yeah.
So I found out where his plot was and went, and was really disappointed to see his headstone. No one had, it had lichen growing on it, algae. It was hard to read. And I didn't have anything with me at the time, Michael, and so I couldn't do nothing. I tried to just by hand see it, but I wasn't doing, making a dent. And I went home, and it was just, I know it sounds kind of corny, but it was like the voice in Field of Dreams.
Oh, hell yeah.
And it was just something was telling me, like, you got to go back and clean that headstone, John. Like, no one's doing it. Should be for who the person was and his contribution, like, he deserves where it should be cleaned up. And I told my wife, I said, you're going to think this is nuts. Like, this guy died before I was born.
Yeah.
I know of him because of the hobby, but, and I told her what I was thinking of doing. I'm like, I'm thinking about going back up there. And she goes, no, that's a really nice thing to do, and I thought she was going to say something like, what are you, not like, she was like, no, that's cool, but what do you use? And I'm like, well, that's my next step. So I'll make this story as short as I YouTubed how to clean a headstone, what to use, what not to use. I didn't want to be the guy that uses the wrong product and then I like scar the headstone. Man. So I found out what to mix and I did that. I went up the next day. I'm like, I got to do this while I'm thinking about it. And I did, and I took a couple pictures and I posted them on social media, and like the story kind of just went a little bit viral, and Sports Collectors Daily, picked it up, and I've had them on the show, and he said, hey, Jack, can I use your photo that you, and I'm like, yeah, by all means. And I just told him, I said, listen, while I did that, I want the story to be more about Jefferson Burdick. I think people need to know who this man was, and they did a great job with it. And then I wrote a piece for Sports Collectors Digest and went from there. And I've sort of just become, I guess, the defect. He never married. He never had kids.
No.
Most of the Burdick family is gone or doesn't have really a major connection to them while they might be released. So I've sort of become like the de facto, I guess, caretaker, at least of the headstone. And so whenever I'm up there, if it's been a month or two, I always will stop by, say, pay my respects, and then just check on the condition. Right now, it's still looking good. So, for someone who meant so much to the hobby, and sometimes he's not mentioned enough, and he did that in the film. And I remember, like, wow, this is like right, and it was pretty early on in the film too. And I just thought, this is a great way to kind of, like, I was impressed early on that you had the fortitude to include him as part of this and what he did and that sort of thing. I'll let you kind of speak to that. I just rambled on there, but go ahead.
No, I think that, a lot of those guys, I wanted to include more. Some of the stuff we cut out, we spoke about other collectors who kind of meant a lot to the hobby, and I wanted so much to put that in there. And if it was a series, John, it would I think it would have been really important to kind of dive in further into the history. I mean, we in the documentary that was cut out, and the stuff that was cut out, we covered Lionel Carter, we covered Larry Fritsch, we covered Frank Nagy, Charlie Conlon, and I had to make some big decisions of how I was like, well, there's three central figures in the hobby that kind of round out a good history from the early days of collecting to where it got really popular, to where it kind of became multi-millions to billions. And those three guys were Jefferson Burdick, Barry Halper, and then obviously Cy Berger. And those are the three that I stuck with when the history side of the documentary. And I remember talking to George Verchek and Brian Brusakis, and they kind of said, hey, if you're going to do this documentary, you got to start with some history. And at first I kind of passed it off, but I'm thinking, well, no, that's true. You have to you kind of have to open it up to the viewer, because you're going to have people who don't understand the history, the history of the hobby. And I thought it was really important to have some key central figures in that. And that's with Jefferson Burdick, starting with him. Yeah.
Yeah. And he's called kind of the godfather of the hobby, or the grand, and again, anyone listening or who does watch the film and then says, hey, I don't know this, learn more about him, because we wouldn't really have the hobby today in the same vein without his contribution. And you just mentioned a whole line of icons of the hobby that are all integral, right?
My God, yeah.
To where we are, and even with the Barry Halper, and I'll piggyback off what you said there too. There was some kind. You did a great job in the film, just covering all the angles, right? You didn't make it like a fluff piece. Like, the hobby is the greatest. The hobby is the greatest hobby, in my opinion.
It is,
but there's warts. But there's warts there too, and you didn't shy away from that. I think it was just an honest assessment. I think that was important. We don't have to mention necessarily the names of the films. Have you seen any of the previous hobby films, and did you take things from that and said, hey, I want to do this differently, or I want to do more? Like, that was good, but we can do this better. Or did you kind of come in pure? There's no wrong answer, obviously.
Yeah,
I'm just asking.
To be honest, I try to avoid some of the known ones just because I didn't want it. One thing I do when I do research with writing a book, or if I'm going to film something, I try not to let too many outside influences affect the vision I want. And I know that sounds kind of douchey, but
no, I get that. I get that.
And I some big ones at the time of when I was filming this was King of Collectibles. I know that series on Netflix with Ken Golden. I don't know Ken Golden. I heard it's a pretty good documentary, but I do know his documentary. It's very celebrity led. So I knew I wanted to stay away from having too many athletes, I didn't want all these celebrities, and it would have just been, I don't want those kind of oohs and ahs. I kind of wanted to be a little bit more honest and more rugged. And then there's another one called Behind the Card. I know Stephen Aoki is a part of that, Bugsy Gelt, and I didn't want to watch it just because I just didn't want that influence. And then there was another one I did view years before I even started my documentary. It was called Jack of All Trades. It was about a guy. And it was a great great documentary. And I I watched that, but that was kind of the only real one I watched prior to.
And that's a great film, and there's a hobby aspect to it, but really that film is like about relationships more than even the hobby. Like the hobby was woven into it, but that was a father and son type movie and family type movie with the cards being sort of the common bond, So
yeah, and it kind of
go ahead.
It kind of gave kind of like an honest assessment of the junk wax era. I think a lot, and because I grew up in the junk wax era, and a lot of people thought later on that those cards would be pretty valuable, and a lot of them weren't. And seeing that guy, I forgot the guy's name who led in the documentary, who created the documentary, but I remember there was a scene where he takes his cards in to sell them at a show to a collector. And the guy was basically giving him $10 for him. Like he there wasn't much he could do with it. He thought he'd get a lot more money. And it's just, it was kind of an eye opener, not just on his father and son relationship, which that eventually led to, but just the overvalue he thought the cards were going to get him it just wasn't there. It was more nostalgia. He was valuing the nostalgia and how much his cards meant to him when he was younger compared to what the actual dollar value of them is at that time. Really interesting.
Yeah, Stu Stone, just to give him, but and I know him. He's been on the show, and I joked with him. I'm like, when's a part 2 coming? His dad did pass away actually, I think last year, and so he's like, I don't know. He didn't close the door, but this film of yours is definitely heavy hobby. Obviously, the name's Hobby Hustle.
Mm-hmm.
Again, you covered really all aspects. How did you line up like to get the people that do appear in the movie? Like, how was that process? Did you start with like a long list and then it just got shorter? How did you go from point A to point B with the people who were featured in the film?
Yeah, it was kind of like I knew I needed my talking heads. So when I approached the Cliff Panizich side of the story, I knew I needed not only Cliff's version of events, but I also needed the other side, the laws side. So I knew I needed the attorney that was prosecuting him. I needed the FBI agents, the detective. I knew I needed that aspect, but I also needed Cliff's lawyer. So those talking heads were kind of easy, but the other ones, the AJ Dillons, and then when I got Tanya Hampton and some of those, and Luke Coy, they were basically through contacts of contacts. I mean, I kind of went a different ways of doing stuff. I used my network of people to get certain people. But on the other side, it was as simple as like somebody like Tanya Hampton, just Instagram DMing her and saying, hey, I'm doing this, or emailing people. And that was kind of my reach out. With AJ Dillon, I knew his manager, not personally, but it was like, so I knew from my manager through his manager, and I knew AJ Dillon was a collector. And I thought, okay, let's talk to him. So reaching out to his manager, who is one of AJ Dillon's best friends, it was just easy to make that happen. But everybody, it was just mostly, it was different ways, man. It was just reaching out on social media, reaching out via email, cold calling, and just pitching. I mean, I've always been really good at pitching stuff. Surprisingly, I'm not a salesman, but I've always been really good at pitching stuff so I can put things in a light and get them excited. Like it's contagious. My excitement for the project got them excited. So, and it wasn't fluff. I mean, it wasn't a lie. When bringing them into the project is exactly what they would hope it would be. I mean, somebody like Brian Brusakis, who's an ex-FBI agent, now he works for Fanatics, and he was kind of hard to get to, but because he's been in other documentaries, but I told him, I said, listen, I don't want, because it was really hard with him because he couldn't talk about certain cases he could talk about, but there were certain ones that were still being prosecuted, still being investigated that he couldn't talk about. And I said, listen, man, I mostly want you just as a talking head, because he's like you. He loves history. He loves the history of the hobby. He's a big fan of it. So sitting down with him and talking with him, it just opened up another world for us. And So once we found that common ground with him, and it was easy. So yeah, that's kind of how I reached out to people. Everybody was different, and yeah.
Time for a quick break, but we'll be right back.
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/kidsandfamily. Just go to Indeed.com/kidsandfamily right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
Hi, I'm Isaac Albert, a longtime card collector and the co-founder of the Penny Sleever. My wife and I started the Penny Sleever with a simple premise in mind: to offer collectors top quality supplies at fair prices. We offer a full range of hobby supplies, and we'll get them to you fast. Whether you're looking for a 260-point magnetic for that oversized patch card, or a slew of semi-rigids for your next PSA submission, the Penny Sleever has you covered. Shop now at thepennysleever.com and use the promo code SCNation to get 10% off your first order. That's SCNation for 10% off at thepennysleever.com. The Penny Sleever. Top quality supplies, fair prices.
Thanks for sticking with us. Let's return to the show.
You don't have to necessarily mention names. I'll leave that. Yeah. Did you have anyone that gave you kind of either a flat out no or sort of
got a lot of
strong?
Go ahead. A lot, John. I got ghosted a lot. Phil Hughes. You know Phil Hughes.
Yeah.
You're from New York, right? So are you a Yankees fan?
Yeah. No, I was when I was a kid, and then I switched over to the Mets. Steinbrenner kind of ruined things for me, especially when he got a little crazy with the cheese whiz, as I jokingly say. And so I switched to the Mets around 84-ish and stuff. But I mean, I have Yank. Like, I was a huge Thurman Munson. I've said on this pod. That was that's how I learned what death was. Michael was again. I'll make this story real short. The news broke in, breaking news. Thurman Munson's plane crashed. I'm 6 or 7 at the time, and I had no one in my family had passed away. I hadn't been to a wake. And so they just said he's dead. And this will tell you how naive I was at the time. I asked my grandfather, I was raised by my grandparents. Yeah. I'm like, does that mean Thurman's not going to play for the Yankees anymore? Like, wasn't the question I asked. And that's where he had to sit me down and like, hey, here's how life works. And I cried. It's the first time I cried over a death. And it was a person, he wasn't a relative. I had never met him personally. I was at Yankee Stadium to watch him, but I never met him. And here I am as a little kid crying and learning kind of what death was. So Thurman Munson, later on Don Mattingly. But as far as team-wise, I wound up converting to a Mets fan about 84.
Which is good, right before the World Series.
Yeah, I always make sure to let people know it was before 86.
Oh, yeah.
Like just
not a bandwagon rider.
And 84 wasn't really a great year. So it wasn't they really kind of came on in 85 and obviously 86. What the other aspect too with the movie that you did a great job, Michael, and it's something that's important to me. You kind of highlighted kids in the hobby, women in the hobby. Well, we're seeing, I think, more of both, and it's refreshing to see. Especially on the women's side, we're seeing not just women collectors. We're seeing women behind the table as dealers. As a dealer myself, I'm seeing a lot more, and that's great. And we're seeing them in corporate positions as well in the hobby. And I obviously support that, and as you should. And But you did, with this film again. You checked off so many boxes, and those were two more, right? You start out with the history. Was that something? Did it organically happen, or was that something you like? I want to do.
Yeah, I don't know. I had most of the film done, and I was winding to the end of where I, was shooting everything, and I thought something's missing from this, and it was clear. I think was it a buddy that mentioned something? He goes, "Wow, there's not a lot of women collectors, huh?" And I think that just woke me up. Whoa, you're right. There's not a lot of women collectors that in this hobby at all, or in this documentary. And I said, we need a woman's perspective for sure. And it was, I mean, like I said, I had like 90%. I was pretty well almost done with filming it. And I had to basically drop everything, drop any future plans, and start going out and trying to find a woman who's deep into the hobby. But I didn't want to get somebody that, I mean, this might sound bad, but I don't want somebody that's like, oh, I collect WNBA cards, because that's just so, it's like, oh yeah, of course you collect.
I get it.
I wanted somebody that had a different perspective of the collecting hobby, but that was something different that we don't hear a lot about. And I came across Tanya Hampton, and it was awesome. I mean, she's a big F1 collector. She collects not only memorabilia, but she attends races. She travels for it. She collects cards, of course, and she's a dentist by day, but a collector on her off time. And she was fascinating. I mean, she lives in Virginia Beach, and she's absolutely fascinating. And I thought, I don't know anything about F1. It'd be great to learn something about F1. And she did that. She did that in the documentary, I thought. And I wanted to get other women in there as well, but I just didn't want it. I don't know if I didn't want it to appear forced,
Yeah.
So that's why I thought she was a great ambassador for the documentary to kind of lead the women aspect of it, because she does talk about other women collectors too, Lauren Taylor and some of them. So I thought it was really important as well. So, yeah.
No, it was well done. I'm not an F1 guy either, but she was really like, her enthusiasm. I'm not a fan of F1. I don't know a ton about it.
Yeah.
But the way her passion shined through, and you shooting her probably was an element of that as well. I was enthralled, even though I couldn't tell you a lot about the sport or the hobby side of it. Like the way it was done, I wouldn't have fast forwarded anyway. But people who do fast forward, like if I would have done that, I still wouldn't have done it, because how it was and what she was talking about, how how she presented herself, and how you laid it out there as part of the film. And so, and like you said, she did a great job sort of paying homage to women in the hobby that she respected. And so I think it encompassed all that. And I think it's a great point you make too. If you sort of overdo it, if you will, it looks more like, oh, it's just, you're patronizing them for the movie, so I hearing you say that makes a lot of sense.
And if you notice, John, too, in that documentary, and this isn't like a spoiler, but I didn't want her only talking about women in the hobby. You know what I mean? Because I think it's, while there's just not as many women in the hobby, there are still women in the hobby. And I know, and she didn't tell us ahead of time, like, listen, I don't want to talk about this. I wanted to touch on it when we were interviewing her, and let it kind of organically go off and see what she says. And she said a lot, but she was more wanted to talk about F1 and her passion. And I wanted that to come through more when doing this, because I wanted her to know, and then women to know, like, it's not like, oh my God, look at a woman in the hobby, everybody look. I didn't want that. I want more I wanted her perspective, but I wanted her passion, just because we're showing other people how passionate they are about what they're collecting, and I wanted her to have that chance as well in this.
Yeah, no doubt. I think that segment was excellent. If you would have told me like, hey, there's going to be an F1 segment, I'd have been like, and watching it in real time, like it was, what I thought would be dull to me, and it's no offense to F1, it's just not my lane.
Yeah,
like I was still captivated, I was still interested, and again, I think that's probably a testament to your film and your efforts, and Tanya's as well, as being a passionate
Yeah.
what she loves, and I learned, like you said, I learned stuff after watching the movie. I know I don't want to say a lot more, but a lot more comparably to what I did before watching the film. You mentioned them already. Oh, go ahead.
I mean, it kind of dates itself too, in the terms of certain things we talk about in the film, like we talk about COVID. So you could tell when I probably started this documentary, and then she talks about how much Lewis Black changing his uniform to black and dealing and stuff, and through the BLM movement. So you could kind of tell, like, oh, she must have been covered during that time when COVID and that was going on. So yeah, I mean, you could definitely tell when watching it. It's like, oh, you could tell, if you looked close enough that, oh, he probably started filming this, a few 3-4 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's important. I mean, the COVID period, while a bad time for the world, obviously, hobby wise, it's really a weird dynamic because I call it the COVID crescendo. The hobby exploded during that time, and as a dealer and a collector, there was good and bad. There's both sides of the coin there, and even as a dealer, like just stuff was selling left and right. I almost felt, I wrote an article about it. I almost felt a little guilty. Yeah. This is a bad time in the world, and yet on the financial side of the hobby, it's not. Yeah, and it's weird. It's a weird dynamic. Like, I didn't do nothing wrong, or no one else did either. If you were doing everything above board, but it was just a weird time period. It was just, it was like the perfect storm, right? You had people home with 10 tabs open on their computer. Yep. The nostalgia bug bit a lot of people with downtime, and they're like, hey, I remember collecting cards. This is still a thing. I'm coming back. And so all the ingredients were there. And so, well, other business like restaurants and movie theaters were in trouble because they couldn't open their doors. The hobby really took, and the hobby didn't do nothing wrong. It just was the perfect storm, that all the ingredients were there for sort of that rise, and then an influx of people, whether someone completely new that says, hey, what is this, all this noise about, or people who were in it that had left and said, hey, I remember this, and now I have kids too, but I still want to do it again and come back. And it was just, all the ingredients were there. So, the fact that the COVID too was a part of the film, I think that's important too, because as we all know, it's an important, it's an important time. While it's not a great, in the overall, COVID is bad for the hobby. It really, was actually a positive. Yeah. Not that you want it to happen that way, but that it is what it is, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's the way it happened.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, a lot of more people from that entered the hobby, and we're seeing the effects of it now. I mean, the hobby's bigger than it's ever been, and something good had to have come from it, because it was just, we needed to get our minds off of what was going on in the world. And I thought, not only showing that in the documentary, but I mean, just being at home myself, I spent a lot on cards and things, so I think a lot of, if you want to say good, happened from it. It was a deterrent, getting our minds off the bad. Collecting helped that for sure.
Yeah, no doubt. You mentioned kind of, you're a collector yourself. We'll come back to the movie, but sure. What do you focus on as a collector? What do you PC? What things kind of move your meter hobby?
Yeah, I collect a lot of different stuff. Like in the sports world, well, in the non-sports world, I like those old books, the old Choose Your Own Adventure.
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/kidsandfamily. Just go to Indeed.com/kidsandfamily right now And support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
Adventure books. I loved them when I was a kid. I thought, man, so I collect a lot of those. But as sports side of things, I collect all the time. I mean, but my big thing is I love Mookie Betts cards and I love Nolan Arenado. And I'm a Detroit Tigers fan, which is weird. So I don't know why I just gravitate towards those two players, but I really like those players. That's two of my favorite players. So I started collecting. During COVID, started collecting those cards, and anyone that hits the market, I'm constantly going out to get it. So those are the big ones I try to I'm highly sought after: Mookie Betts cards and Nolan Arenado cards randomly.
Yeah, no doubt. You listen. You could have picked two worse guys: Mookie Betts and MVP, Nolan Arenado. I think he's one of those underrated third basemen that doesn't get enough credit. Look at the numbers, right? So, being a collector and being someone part of the hobby, how much do you think that aided making this film, comparatively speaking? Let's say someone from the outside that would take on a project like that. Would you say that gave you sort of a home field or built-in advantage?
Oh yeah, definitely, John. Definitely. Just because we've seen people in other documentaries, probably they tackle a subject. It could be anything. And you could tell they're kind of an outsider on the subject. There's not that thing that connects you, right? I mean, as you're watching, you feel there's documentaries out there that you feel disconnected from just because the creator, you could tell isn't they're new to whatever they're talking about, which is fine. But it misses that heart. And one thing with collecting, right away, the nostalgia, we think of our past, right? We think of, as me, I think of my dad. I think of how I got introduced to the hobby. And I knew that was going to be an advantage getting into this because the collector, like you and I, the collector can look back and say, oh yeah, I totally know what he's talking about. Oh, I can relate to that. Oh yeah. And that's, I think that really does help. It definitely helped me because it helped me carve out the story I wanted to tell. And I wanted to not just feature baseball. I'm a big baseball fan, but I also wanted to show other sports like football, a little bit of hockey, everything I could throw in there. Without doing over the top, I could. And I knew being a collector definitely helped. Yeah, that definitely set the gateway for me to introduce all of it and tell the stories. Yeah.
Yeah, and I agree. And like you said, and not that even in positions of power in the hobby where a company will hire a CEO from outside the hobby.
Yeah,
I'm not saying 100%, but a high percentage of the time that company will fail. I don't want to say fail, but will take a step back or fail, and that CEO doesn't typically, unfortunately, last long and survive. So I think having that perspective, even in, not comparing the CEO, I mean, you're the CEO of this movie in the sense,
right?
And I think having that hobby background and knowledge, I think that goes a long way because it's going to be true, and nothing's going to really catch you off guard. You might learn some stuff, but nothing's going to really catch you completely off guard. That being said, I'll ask you that. Did anything surprise you, as much as you knew about the hobby going in the filming of this and production of this? Did anything make you say, "Wow, I knew that, but maybe not to that extent"?
Yeah, there were a few stories. Some inside baseball here. I really tried to get PSA and JSA involved in the documentary, and early on they were all about it. And this was when Joe Orlando was running PSA, and but they wanted to tell the history of PSA, which I wanted to do. I wanted to do everything, but when I questioned their the way they grade, when I wanted a little bit more insight, I had some questions that they weren't big fans of. When I had when I wanted to show the other side of the hobby, they were completely out. They're like, nope, we're tapping out. We're not going to talk to you anymore. But I wanted to show both sides of the story. I didn't think going in that people would be so dismissive of showing both sides of the story. I thought, everybody, we try to come at it from an honest perspective. And I'm a former journalist, so I wanted to come at it from we're going to tell this side of the story, but we're also going to tell the other side So not only the viewer can gauge like what their thoughts are on it, but we're also come across as genuine. And going into this, I thought, even on Cliff's side, I mean, Cliff thought we were just going to talk about his side when I told him the entire time, like, I want to get both sides of the story. Like, I have your side, but we have to get the legal side of it too. We got to get the law enforcement side of it. And he had really big problems with that. And I think going into this, to answer your question overall, I thought people would be more receptive to hearing both sides of the hobby, but there's so many people, not everybody, but there are a lot of people that I came across that were really, really adamant on not telling the bad side of things. They just wanted everything to be about what they wanted to talk about and didn't want to talk about anything else, that contradicted that or that battled that thought process. So that was kind of a bummer, in those aspects. Yeah.
And I agree, but I think the people who watch the film and the hobbyists and collectors who watch the film, or even people who watch the film that maybe not be part of the hobby, I think will appreciate the fact. I know I do. It's one of the first things, when I was writing, some notes down I just said kudos to, covering both sides, right? Both sides of that coin. That coins are double-sided. There's a good side and there's a bad side. You didn't shy away from that. Like I said, he didn't make it all fluff like, hey, everything is orchestra music and roses and daisies and because people who are in the hobby know that that's not an accurate assessment. So, the fact that you covered some of the black eye stuff that we have in the hobby, it's just a truer depiction of what the hobby is. It's still for every bad story, there's 10 great ones, but there is that bad story.
There is.
And, some of the powers that be, like you mentioned, probably don't want to be the ones to mention it. They know it exists, but it's sort of, taboo for them to go there. And well, I get it. It would have been refreshing to see a PSA or a JSA say, listen,
yes,
JSA has said, like, this is their quote, like 85% of the Michael Jordan autographs that are submitted to them for, authentication fail.
Yeah.
So
no doubt.
So that when an autograph fails for the majority of them because someone faked it. Now there's some that maybe they just can't authenticate it either way. It's too close to call or they're not 100% sure. But in the majority of those cases, they're saying Michael Jordan didn't sign that in example. And that's just, that's real. That's why they have a business. If every autograph was real, we wouldn't need a JSA or a PSA or all those authentication services. So I don't see why we can't talk about it. I think they've touched on it in some stats they released. Like it is what it is, right? And they're regarded as, the two of the top companies in their field. Like they should be able to say, hey, this is why we exist. This is why we care. This is why we do our research and learn and stay ahead or try to stay one chess move ahead of people doing unscrupulous things. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I guess it's just nuts. They don't really want to go there. Like
they don't really want to go there because they don't want their tactics being questioned. Like one of the big one I had for GSA was they had a LeBron James autograph that they used to authenticate other LeBron James autographs. It was well known. I saw the autograph, and as you've seen in the documentary, that was Cliff's autograph, not LeBron James's. They don't want to talk about it, and I get it. I mean, nobody wants to talk about the stuff that isn't, like you said, like a black eye to their company, to the hobby. I get it, man. I totally do. But at the same time, if you're open and honest about it, I think people are a little more receptive to it. And it was just hard. I mean, like you were mentioning Michael Jordan. I mean, a lot of people who submit, of course, that's going to be fake. A lot of those autographs are going to be fake because Michael Jordan doesn't sign a lot.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, he doesn't sign a lot. Aaron Rodgers doesn't sign a lot. There's a lot of athletes who don't sign a lot. So it's easy for JSA and some of these companies to be like, oh yeah, that's probably fake. And I get that.
All right, guys, we're gonna stop it right there. We're not done though. Part 2 next week. More great conversation. Go check this movie out, Hobby Hustle. I watched it. It is the best hobby movie that we have had produce. And I don't mean any disrespect to any of the ones that I've seen prior. Most of them were good in their own right. Stu Stone's Jack of All Trades, which is really more of a life movie than a hobby movie. This movie is really more of a documentary based on what the hobby entails, good, bad, and ugly, like we said. So definitely check that film out. I don't think you'll be disappointed. If you do check the film out, let me know what you thought. Am I wrong? Am I right? Let me know what you would do differently and that sort of thing. Play armchair director, if you will. So definitely looking forward to the conclusion of my conversation with Director Michael Dault next week. Hope you are as well.
Time for our Hobby is the People Announcer of the Week.
Hello, this is Mark Hoyle, and remember, the hobby is the people.
If you'd like to be the Hobby is the People Announcer of the Week, do a WAV or MP3 file and send it to sportscardnationpc@gmail.com.
That's a wrap for this week. Huge thanks to you, the listeners out there, because without you, there is no us. If you like the show, we truly appreciate positive reviews. Big ups to our great guests who drive the show and our awesome sponsors who make it all possible. Sports Card Nation will be back next week, but don't forget to catch either Hobby Quick Hits or Card Mentions coming up on Monday. I'll leave you with this. How do we change the world? One random act of kindness at a time. Remember, the hobby is the people.
Iron Sports Cards is your #1 source for all your PSA and other grading submissions. Their elite status improves turnaround times. Heck, they even provide the card savers. Their chat rooms provide updates on all your submissions. They also offer wax options and single cards to cover all the bases. Check them out on Facebook at Iron Sports Cards Group or on the web at ironsportscards.com, or even give them a call at 1-877-IRON-PSA. Rob's got you covered.
For nearly 50 years, Sports Collectors Digest has been the voice of the hobby, bringing you comprehensive coverage of the sports collectible industry. From industry news, auction results, market analysis, and in-depth stories about collectors and their collections, Sports Collectors Digest has everything you need to know about the hobby. SCD is also your leading source for listings of sports collectible dealers, card shops, card shows, and the latest from the industry's top companies. To check out all the latest news or to subscribe to the hobby's oldest magazine, visit sportscollectorsdigest.com or call 1-800-829-5561.